All right. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show, and we've got two professors on the show. And they actually are professors who have an open mind, which these days is really unusual. You may have to take away their degrees and cancel them. We've got Bob Wright. And Bob, why don't you give a quick CV to the viewer?
Sure. I have a PhD in history from the State University of New York in Buffalo in 1997. And since then, I've taught at the University of Virginia and New York University Stern School of Business and a school out in South Dakota. And right now, I am the Senior Faculty Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. And I have authored or co-authored 24 books, including one with Jan Traflet.
Okay, and Jan Traflet, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Well, first of all, Bob and I are very, very happy to be on your program today. So thank you for having us. I'm a professor of management at the Freeman School at Bucknell University. And I got my PhD many years ago at Columbia University, where I studied under Alan Brinkley and had wonderful professors from a whole range of ideological viewpoints, including Eric Foner and others that really were wonderful professors to have. And I am very privileged to be able to teach at Bucknell some classes on stock market history and business ethics. I teach a class on stakeholder capitalism, and I've done a lot of research on Wall Street. I've did a book with Johns Hopkins on the democratization of the stock market in the Cold War. And now I have my second book out with Bob Wright, telling the story of shareowner activist Vilma Soss. And the book is out by Bob Wright and myself. It's called Fearless. And it's an amazing story about how two shareowner activists, Vilma Soss and her mentee, Evelyn Davis, shook up the boardrooms and became household names in the 50s and 60s primarily.
Interesting. And give us a little bit more of the theme of the book and maybe tie it into what's happening today in the economy, where, in my view, we don't have an economy anymore. We have a rigged game, and it is rigged in favor of those in power. They call it the Cantillon effect in economics. The people closest to the money changers wind up benefiting. And ironically, the people who support this call themselves liberals who care about the working man, when in fact, the working man is being decimated. So go ahead and elucidate us on that.
Well, Vilma Soss was all about advocating for little investors and the small man and woman. And she started out as a career as a journalist, and in many ways, had a calling as an investigative journalist and believed in really using her voice. And that's one of the reasons why we called the book Fearless, was because she wasn't afraid to say things that might upset the status quo. And she believed firmly in helping ordinary Americans do better with their lives. And so she actually had a radio show for a long period of time on NBC. It was called Pocketbook News, and later it was renamed Vilma Says. But she'd try to explain some of the major events happening in politics and the economy, and give advice to her readers to try to help keep them informed. And Bob and I have had an amazing journey of really realizing what an impact this shareowner activist had for several decades in the United States. And we were kind of stunned that for the impact that she had, that she became largely forgotten in the 21st century.
Sounds like a great movie, actually.
Yeah. Well, funny you say that. So there was a movie made about her, loosely based on her life, in the 1950s. It was called Solid Gold Cadillac, and it's
Wow.
about a single woman who, is goes into a company and takes on the board there and exposes malfeasance. And so what Bob and I have said is that we do need to have a remake of that movie and take out the fictional elements and just put in pure Wilma Soss, because pure Wilma Soss is even more of an interesting character than the fictionalized version in Solid Gold Cadillac.
Interesting. What actress would you choose?
Bob, I'll leave that one to you.
Elizabeth Banks.
Mhm,
Oh, that's interesting.
mhm.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
And people like Wilma these days will generally be discredited.
Mhm.
You always know when someone is onto the truth.
Yeah.
See the media piling on and attacking them,
Mhm.
gratuitous insults. It's like what's happening with the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. book,
Mhm.
where, they're using every means other than debating the issues. And I'm sure being in academia, you guys have seen that, because I see it all the time. One of my son's professors at UPenn Law School is a woman named Amy Wax, who has an opinion,
Mhm.
and she's not a dummy, and she
Yeah.
is able to articulate that opinion.
Mhm.
But the attacks on her are just completely ridiculous. And I have to say, she's courageous. Have you guys experienced that with any reviews or people criticizing what you're trying to do?
Well, what we're seeing on college campuses is that it's difficult to bring in any speaker, even one that's not as controversial as Amy Wax, and that anytime that you bring in a speaker, it's assumed that the organizers of the event implicitly agree with everything that that person's ever written or done in their entire lifetime. And so it's this huge and erroneous sense of responsibility to vet incredibly any speaker that comes to campus for who that person might offend, or that a snippet of something that they said maybe out of context or maybe in context, that and it's just getting to the point where it's difficult to you know be organizing any type of event that gets at multiple viewpoints. And even if you have people from both sides in a debate format, that also isn't good enough often. And so these are very tough times where it's challenging to figure out how to go forward. And Bob, I think, wants to add in there.
Yeah, in terms of the book, we've just been ignored basically by everyone on the left. Though you would think that the story of a strong woman advocating for more women on corporate boards would be, a huge story for them. But it's not, because Wilma, once said that she was born Republican. Not that she became Republican, she was born Republican. She was, Republican her whole life. She was with Nixon right up to the bitter end. But she was an independent thinker too, and fearless, which is why we named the book that. And if you can see the cover up over my shoulder there, she's speaking through a megaphone. That was at a corporate annual meeting. She learned that they would cut her microphone if she was saying things that they didn't like. So she brought a bodyguard and a megaphone. And when they cut her mic, she just picked up the megaphone and started talking and had the bodyguard protect her. And this is in the 1950s, right?
Yeah.
This is unheard of at the time. So you would think that the left would be all over this, but they're simply not, because she wasn't asking the government to step in and to
Yeah.
put more women on corporate boards. She was trying to use logic and reason and moral suasion, and the rules of the corporate game, and she didn't like those rules, trying to change those rules so that she could get done what she thought needed to be done.
Isn't it also the case that the financiers of the establishment are the big corporations? So therefore, the left is not going to go against those who are putting money in their pockets.
Yeah.
Kind of like every financial show on television.
Yeah.
The sponsor being Pfizer.
Yeah.
So what are they
Well,
gonna
it's
do?
funny you should say that, because Wilma had this NBC radio show that ran from 1957 to 1980. And I believe it was in 1958 or 1959, a large pharmaceutical company that's still around and I won't name sponsored her show. And she gave up the sponsorship and the extra money that came with that because she didn't like the way that they were trying to influence her content.
Right.
And she went to NBC and she said, listen, I am telling people how to invest, not what to invest in, in detail, but what they should be thinking about and the approaches they should take. And I can't have this pharmaceutical company, swaying what I'm trying to say. And they agreed with her and dropped the sponsorship, but she got a reputation for being an independent investor and an independent voice in the financial journalism. The first broadcast female financial journalist in the United States, and she got a huge following, over a million followers, as far as could be ascertained at that time, which is a big audience today, and back then was huge, because people she wasn't always correct, but people knew that what Wilma Soss said is what Wilma Soss believed.
Exactly. Sincerity and integrity. Integrity.
Exactly.
You're not going to always be right.
Yeah.
But as long as it's an honest belief.
Yeah.
I had somebody attack me by telling her brother, the thing I hate the most about Bob Unger is he believes what he says. That's exactly what they hate. They believe what I say. Wow. What a revolution.
Yeah.
Tell me who she was working for the first time she became a dissident whistleblower.
Yeah, she was just working for herself and for the foundation that she helped form. So she truly was independent, and she had a very successful career in PR as a publicist before she went into shareholder activism. And she never was enormously wealthy, but she had enough that, she was comfortable with her husband. She had no kids, but she was part of this cohort of Republican strong women in the financial world, and her nonprofit was open to anyone. Her nonprofit 501c3 company that was focused on the advancement of financial education, financial literacy, and Federation of Women Shareowners in American Business was open to men. So in many ways, she, Evelyn Davis, another Republican woman, Muriel Siebert, they're all were part of that same era, and all very different. But it is, gratifying to see, okay, here you have someone who identified as a conservative woman, and she was fought for other women. She fought for minorities, other minorities, including African Americans, and her bodyguard was a female African American. And this is in the 50s and 60s, and pre the heart of the civil rights movement. And so it is wanting more women on boards, but she wanted more qualified women on boards. And it's obviously at the time that she was started in the late 1940s, there were 0 women on any Fortune 500 board in the country. And she wanted equal opportunities, which I wholeheartedly agree with. But she in terms of, we've talked a lot, Bob and I, about, what would Wilma think about some of the things that are happening today, and what would she have weighed in on, and how would she see the world today, and some of the equity issues, and some of the issues of gender parity on boards, and many of the issues that have galvanized public opinion.
And also about,
yeah,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, also about the inflation that's going on right now, because she was adamantly opposed to delinking the dollar from gold. So
My type of lady, I would have dated her back in those days.
yeah, and she complained about the taxes. And I heard recently someplace in the mainstream media that there is some talk about having some sort of tax relief due to inflation, because they're essentially taxing us through this, what's inflation's often called the currency tax, right? So can't we write the currency tax off from our income tax? And it was because of Wilma, partly, that the IRS finally started to index tax brackets in the 1980s, because she complained bitterly about it, about how you'd make a higher nominal income, but the same or even a lower real income, but you're getting bumped into a higher tax bracket.
So
the irony is when the alleged president, he was talking about the gift that he's giving with the new COLA adjustment for inflation, is look what I did for you. You're going to get 8-point-some-odd% more in your Social Security payment because of inflation, and people think they're getting something.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
Yes,
it's a good spin.
Well, when she worked, you, at least back in those days, certain metrics, profits, balance sheets, now those are irrelevant. The only thing that matters is, what did Jerome Powell say today? That's it.
She knew Benjamin Graham and was a Graham value investor type, buy and hold and hold and hold and hold. And that's why she got involved in corporate governance, right? Because she didn't want to play that Wall Street game where you buy, and if you don't like what a company's doing, you just sell out and sell it to the next sucker. She believed if there's a company with good economic fundamentals but has some issues going on in the boardroom, then stockholders should get together and try to straighten those issues out rather than just selling. So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
She pushed for things like cumulative voting, which allows minority shareholders to concentrate all their votes on one candidate instead of having to spread them over the entire board. And she believed in the secret ballot. Because many corporations have ESOPs, employee share ownership plans. So a big chunk of their stockholders are employees. Well, if the managers know how people are voting, the employees are going to, of course, automatically vote along with their bosses, whether they believe in them or not. So she pushed hard for secret ballots in corporate governance. And now, of course, secret ballot is an issue again in her political elections, which, she would have gone bonkers over.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would she say about the fact that so-called conservatives today are against welfare, which I am also, but they love welfare for corporations and they love bailouts. And that kind of hypocrisy to me is striking. What would be her view there?
I think she would see the moral hazard embedded in all that. She was really ahead of her time in many of her ideas and many of her causes. And it is interesting today, thinking of, after the election, that she thought that the political ballot was very important, but she felt that people's economic votes mattered a heck of a lot more than most Americans realized. And so she would do things like encourage people to buy one share of stock in a company just so that they could attend the annual meeting and voice their concerns. And even if you didn't have a large proportional stake, that you still had a voice and to use it, and that companies could be extremely powerful in changing society for the good if you are pushing and being the long-term investor with a voice.
Yeah.
Of course, the SEC reacted by making it so that you have to own significantly more than one share in order to attend stockholder meetings these days. But she would she leveraged her one or few shares to the hilt because she relied on her journalism and PR careers and played journalists like fiddles, basically, by showing up to many meetings in costumes that matched what her point was for that particular meeting. So she used to show up with a huge magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes deerstalker style cap. And of course, the journalist would run right up to her and say, "Why are you dressed like that, Wilma?" And she would say, because the footnotes in the financials are so small, I need a giant magnifying glass in order to see what they say. And that's where the real story is, in those footnotes. And of course, we know that there have been all kinds of accounting games that have gone on since she passed in 1986. And I think if she was around and had gotten her way on one particular reform, she wanted stockholders to pay outside auditors. If she had gotten her way on that, then, you know, and the Enron and Xerox and WorldCom scandals would have been much less likely.
Are you familiar with Weiss Research and their job they do as stock analysts and bond analysts, and how they don't take money from the companies that they're giving ratings to? I think the company is called Weiss Ratings because, as you know, the companies that do the ratings are being paid.
Yep. Yeah. Well, subprime crisis really exposed that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I really credit you guys for trying to educate the public because I speak to college students and constantly, and they know absolutely nothing. I ask some of them, how is money created? I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
What the Federal Reserve is.
Yeah.
No clue. They think it's an elected entity. It's part of the government. And you asked them about what happened in 1971 and why everything got so expensive after 1971. Real estate, when it went up, it used to go up a little bit. Not the way it's done since 1971. Why did that happen? And I know that correlation is not always causation, but I mean, when there's a correlation for a long enough time, after a while, you have to think about what's causing all this.
Yeah.
So you guys, I credit you for, you know, trying to educate the public.
Yeah, well, biography can be a great way to do that because it feels less didactic than classroom type of environment. And Bob and I have thought a lot about that power of biography to increase financial literacy, which is something that Wilma Soss, you know, in terms of an issue near and dear to her heart, was getting more Americans not just to be literate in other areas, but also financially literate.
I see that Zoom is saying we have 1 minute. So sum up and also tell the viewer where they can get the book or how they can get the book.
US dollars are accepted. It's still at Amazon and BarnesandNobles.com. All Seasons Press has links to all the places that sell it. There's a wonderful audiobook version In the
Fearless.
physical book, there are pictures. In the audio book, there are actually clips of Wilma's voice from her own recorded radio show.
Wow, that's great. And
Yeah.
I really want to thank you for
Oh, thanks for letting us talk about Fearless and Wilma Soss, and we're very appreciative.
and really push that idea of a movie. I think, in today's times, it would be even more popular. It would be like a